Welcome to Feel Seen Space. We are a digital platform designed for artists and creatives who yearn for more. At a time of massive change, what does it mean to create? What role does artistic expression serve for the individual and the collective? On this podcast, we try to answer these questions by interviewing artists on their holistic creative processes, their work, and their personal journey.
Today on the Feel Seen Space podcast, I'm happy to welcome Hannah Gottlieb-Graham, founder of Alma Communications, a New York-based PR agency working with artists, museums, galleries, and cultural institutions globally. Hannah shares how her journey from editorial roles at The New Yorker and Surface magazine to leading communication at the Aperture Foundation led her to launch Alma in 2019, building a business guided by care, trust, and meaningful collaboration. In this conversation, we talk about the evolving role of PR in the arts, how to make cultural projects truly visible, and the wisdom, values, and relationship that drives Hannah's work every day, navigating the fast-paced, ever-changing creative industry. Let's dive in. Hi, Hannah. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How's it going?
Good. Welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So, where are you in the world right now?
I'm in my office in Seaport. I work at WSA, which is this really special kind of creative building that I'm sure lots of people who are listening to this podcast know about, or maybe also work from. But Gabriella Khalil and some other friends of mine have kind of founded this really great community for lots of creative companies and small business owners to gather and share office space. So we're here. We've been here for the last 3.5 years.
That's amazing. So I would like to hear more about the start of your business, Alma. You started it 6 years ago, right?
Yeah, at the very, very end of 2019 into 2020, which was a wild time. But, we had like 4 months under our belt before the pandemic. And, it's evolved a lot. We first started working with individual artists and friends. Institutions were closed. So now we work with a kind of different caliber of institutional client, museums, galleries, nonprofits, physical spaces, fairs, festivals. And starting out, it was really a friends and family business supporting curators, artists. We worked on some book projects and public art installation. It was an interesting time. I think in 2020, a lot of people were thinking about how they approach communications and how they translate themselves in the world. So we were actually really fortunate to be very busy, but it was a strange time to be launching a business for sure.
Yeah, it's very brave of you. There was also a radical change in everyone's life. What made you say, I need to start my own project? This is the time.
Yeah, I'd been working in magazines and media for a couple years. So I, started off thinking I wanted to be an editor, magazine editor, a journalist. I worked at the New Yorker in the photo department and then also at Surface magazine. So I had those two roles and really just fell in love with the media landscape and creating stories, crafting images, especially, I studied photography. So working with the team, and this is, over a decade ago. So budgets were different. We used to have money to send people out on assignment and just, you get the images back and work through the layout. It's just the most magical thing. But it can also be a bit lonely editing. And I'm very social and love kind of connecting the dots from people to ideas and really executing. And what's interesting is when I was at the New Yorker, I received a lot of pitches, and there was this one kind of like freelance solo operator publicist who was just exceptionally good and really stood out from the rest. And I kind of became obsessed with the idea of really mimicking that and becoming a great publicist, because you can tell the difference right away. Even if there's a decent idea in a pitch, if it's packaged incorrectly, like the press kit links are broken and nothing really makes sense. Like you're like, somewhere in here, there's a good idea, but the amount of time it's going to take me to rewrite it and send to my editor to get the green light, it's just not even, I don't have that 25 minutes. And then this one PR that I worked with just used to hand things to me on a silver platter. And it was so easy to feel seen and taken care of. Like they've done their homework. they know my beat, they know what I'm into. This is the right fit for me. And it's packaged in a beautiful way. So I can really just forward it over and boom, the story is, we're off to the races. So anyway, that actually really inspired me to pivot to communications. And I spent a decade working at arts and culture focused agencies here in New York City and learned a lot, worked at three different businesses at, much different scales, smaller companies just sort of starting out and building, some really established, very big firms with like 75 people teams. And yeah, I learned a tremendous amount, but felt that I also wanted to get an in-house experience. So I moved over to the Aperture Foundation. I was first a publicist there and then promoted to communications director. And that was really the experience where I think I kind of bit the entrepreneurial apple.
Mm-hmm.
It's a one person shop and Aperture's a really tiny business. I think it's got such a global reputation that many people think it's much bigger than it is. But we were a teeny, teeny, tiny staff, 1, 2, 3 people, absolute max per department, everyone wearing lots of hats and,
Yeah.
just like an exceptionally skilled, highly performant staff. And we did a lot. We had the gallery for the first 2 years that I was there. So we had a rotating exhibition program. We teamed up with other institutions globally and traveled our shows. We're a publishing house, so we published like 40 books a year. I ran a campaign for every single title on my own.
Oh, wow.
The magazine, the photo book awards, the gala, anything that happened under the Aperture umbrella, I really looked after from a communications POV. So it kind of felt like I was running my own little operation within a
Mm-mm.
bigger organization. And I think after doing the kind of the magazine work, the agency stint, and then having that opportunity, I'd seen many different pieces of the communications and media landscape. And I felt confident enough to take all of those learnings and build my own thing.
And I feel when you're so involved and your role is 360, you learn what you love and what you don't want to do. And so I'm sure it gave you also a lot of
Yeah.
strength. Being a business owner, I know it's also challenging. It can be lonely at times. How did you manage to build the team around you?
Yeah, so it really all started with my first client, Antoine Sargent, who's a really incredible curator, critic, and now he's a gallerist and he has a day job at Gagosian, but he's a lot more than just that role, which he's completely excelled at, the way that he does with everything. I met him. Actually, we'd sort of been like friendly socially in the art world. We're both from Chicago. We have lots of mutual people in our lives and connections, but we worked together on the press rollout for his book, The New Black Vanguard, which was published in Aperture in my second to last year. The campaign it really was robust and kind of took over my life in a good way. And you'll probably get a sense from this podcast that I'm quite an obsessive person. Like in that same way that I obsessed over that one great publicist, I just totally got like lost and obsessed in this project. But if you're not familiar with the New Black Vanguard, the premise is that it spotlights a mix of very young, maybe not that young anymore, but at the time were quite young, rising, emerging fashion photographers who were kind of operating between the lens of fashion photography and fine art. And so we were bridging that gap between two industries. And, I just think it was really conceptually ahead of its time. Quill Lemons, I think you'll have to fact check me on this, but I think Quill was like a sophomore in college at Parsons or Pratt when he was in the book.
Okay.
So Tyler
Yeah.
Mitchell he did the cover image and he just shot the cover of Vogue, the Beyonce cover that really kind of set things off and lit his career on fire. And so it was just on the precipice of this total like rise, and being a part of everybody's career growth and journey, I think was so astounding. And same for Antoine. He'd been a critic and a writer who I actually used to pitch. He wrote for the New Yorker and Vogue and the New York Times, many other outlets. So we'd had from translating that kind of publicist-writer relationship to a collaborator relationship at Aperture while building many of these other folks' careers. It was super motivating. And Antoine was really one of the people who said, you should do your own thing, like you're ready for this, and gave me the courage to do so. So he was my first client. And I really built the business around him and his network, my network, our kind of shared community, which is how that sort of first year started, of working with fellow artists and people kind of in our world and orbit. And then my first hire, I think, was like a year and a half in, but the business has evolved a lot. As a solo operator working with friends for the first year and a half. And then
Mm-hmm.
things started growing and changing and operationalizing and, kind of turned into like a more legitimate company.
That's great. You're such a connector, and I know how community is important for you and building on friendship. You work with Diana Marcosian that we both love so much. You also work with the Whitney, with amazing galleries in New York and globally. What's the main difference between working with artists, photographers, and a gallery
A great
affiliated?
question. Yeah. I think also just that friendship piece, it really is so valuable to me at many of the former agencies I worked at. You just feel so disgruntled and frustrated working with a really challenging client with high demands and doesn't treat you like a collaborator or a member of the team, which really you should feel like an extension of the team on a communication side. There were many clients who used to scream and yell and it's not particularly incentivizing.
Yeah.
My community is really important to me. Even though now we do work with a bigger mix of institutional folks, there always has to be that friendship feeling. Sometimes it starts out as a friendship and develops into a professional relationship, like with Diana or Tyler or Antoine, many of the other kind of people who've been in my life. And then sometimes it's the reverse. It starts as a professional engagement, and then very deep friendships are birthed with the teams that I'm working with. And I'm always keeping an eye out for that when we're kind of trying clients on or deciding, going through the many rounds of conversations, if it's a fit, what the scope of work is going to look like, what they need. So I'm always really thinking, am I going to want to spend time with this person? Because,
Yeah.
honestly, life's too short to just toil away trying to build careers for people who you don't actually either believe in or respect or want to spend your working hours with. This is a job, I always say to my team, this is a job, it's like a service job, it's client
Oh,
services, but it's really like an acts of service. You're here to amplify somebody's voice and mission. So you really do have to care and believe in it, I think, to deliver the best results. But yeah, working with individual artists, it's something that we'll always do that I really love. I think many big agencies, as they grow, they kind of leave that bit behind because typically artists don't have the same budgets as institutions. We've made a really conscious effort to always work with a mix of individual artists. So this year we're working with Diana Marcosian, who's been a longstanding friend and client, great photographer, collaborator. She shoots all of our team headshots, and we've
mm-hmm.
done all of her book projects, some film projects. She's got a lot of things coming up. And then we're working with Allison Janae Hamilton, who's also a wonderful kind of mixed media and filmmaker artist and has a slew of museum exhibitions. So that's really fun when you get to work with an artist who almost treats like they know that they're running a business and that they are their own operation. Sometimes it's easier working with artists who are really decisive and direct and know what they want. And there's no red tape or bureaucracy, there's no
Yeah.
middleman. The bigger the institution, typically the more complicated things are. Images have to be cleared by 40 different departments before they get to you. So it's a different set of challenges and needs. I think working closely with an artist or an artist studio, there's like a sense of immediacy and closeness, where working with an institution, typically you're working with the communications department in-house, but then there's so many other things happening around you. So it just takes more time to get connected with, the museum's director or the curator or artists associated with the exhibition. Things are just funneled a little bit differently, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how also you pick and choose your clients and build on your relationship. Like you talk a lot about care and trust, values that really resonate with us. I'm
Yep.
curious to hear a little bit more about being inspired by your parents, being writers, researcher.
Yeah.
You travel the world with them. Can you tell us about your upbringing?
Yeah. Yes. I love talking about my upbringing because it really is special. I'm a very lucky girl. My parents I shouldn't say were, they're writers, published authors, researchers. They were professors. And I grew up in the Midwest, but we traveled quite a lot. My mom's a cultural anthropologist and a researcher. My dad did a bit of travel writing too, but he's kind of has done a mix of nonfiction, fiction, and poetry. He just completed a really special novel that he's been working on for 35 years. But yeah, we grew up in this incredibly intellectual, super creative environment. Many of my parents' friends were artists or writers, professors, researchers, and we used to have these big salon dinners. I grew up very independently. We traveled a lot. My parents really just they believed that I should kind of tag alongside their careers. So I remember my mom would just like pull me out of school when she had a conference and bring me. And, there were years that I was homeschooled. There were years that I lived in different countries. We lived in Lisbon for a bit. We lived in Brussels for a bit. My parents had frequent sabbaticals and kind of research years. And again, they just kind of bring me along. On the one hand, there were times where I was lonely. I didn't grow up in a traditional setting where I had, one best friend who I followed, and I had a group, that we kind of grew up together and we still remain in touch. Every year we lived in a different place. And so you had to kind of have this chameleon-like sense of adaptability, which I think for me, my social ability and my personality, it really worked. My brother's a little bit quieter. It affected him differently, but it really kind of instilled in me a great love of travel and learning different people and communities and cultures. And just, I think that sense of care really was built very early on, because no matter where we lived, where I went to school, I would find people who I felt connected to and hold on to them for dear life. And even if I knew we were moving the next year, or going back home to the Midwest, or going to a different country, I would find my people. And so I'm super grateful for that experience. We saw tons of art, went to libraries. Yeah, it was great. I mean, there's a lot of interesting, like, traditional ways of life and growing up in the United States that I wasn't like, we never went on a beach vacation ever. I didn't do that till I was like in my late 20s. Like, if we were
Okay.
going to travel, we were going to learn something. But I appreciate that. And yeah, my parents are super inspiring to me. My mother's name is Alma, which means
Okay.
soul in Portuguese and Spanish. And so I named the firm really for her and after her, wanting to develop a really soulful approach to communications and the way that we work.
And I'm sure you were inspired by your parents' relationship, because now you're working with your husband and
Yeah.
now business partner. How does that work for you, the relationship between the personal and the business?
Yeah, my parents have written books together. They used to have a shared office and library. So I grew up really seeing that collaboration and thinking it was normal and beautiful for two married people to raise children and build careers separately, but together. They didn't do everything together. It's interesting now, like Andrew and I spent actually a lot more time together than my parents do. My
Okay.
mom taught, a set of classes, my dad taught a set of classes, and then they intersected in a few different areas, but they did have more kind of separate lives and schedules in many ways. Andrew does fully, like, he's clocking in and clocking out the same hours as me. We're in the office together, sitting in like our little pod side by side. His desk is right to the left next to mine. But it's interesting. He does do very different things. My husband, Andrew, was a lawyer for 12 years. He was a real estate attorney and really has always loved space and design, hence real estate. Although, he ended up just like writing 60-page appellate briefs at his desk for over a decade. So it actually had nothing to do with that. He's always really, I think actually in another life, he would have been an amazing architect. And we're building a house together now, which has been very exciting to see that part of his brain really light up. But anyway, he loves
Mhm.
space, he loves design. And I think being a lawyer gave him a real sense of kind of rational and operational approaches that he now brings to this more creative role. And when we met, we were both going through these kind of career transitions. So he was leaving his legal practice, and I was just about to leave Aperture and start Alma, and we began dating. We fell in love very quickly right away, and I started the business, and he kind of just hitched his wagon to me. There wasn't
Mhm.
even really a conversation, like it just sort of happened, and it was really organic. I remember we were working with Antoine, and things were just really like makeshift. Like Antoine used to pay me on Zelle every month, which is fine, but it just wasn't what it is now. And so Andrew is really the person who said, how are you going to handle finance and legal and operations and
Yeah.
when you scale and when we hire a team and are you going to be an LLC or an S corp? Like all of these things that my
Mm.
brain doesn't even think about those things. How are you going to handle the website, the brand? And so having that having that brain that just works so differently, I think has been an unbelievable benefit for the business. he really has been able to take my vision and network and operationalize us and turn Alma into what it is today, which is a full service agency, not just supporting clients with PR and communications needs, but also branding, design, linguistic work, press release writing, bio writing, kind of language audits and stakeholder interviews. We do a mix of social media management and then also work on partnerships and programs and events. So we've totally, evolved from those very early days of me being a solo publicist. And a lot of that has been Andrew's making. He kind of brought us through a big internal rebrand and design refresh and led that whole process, taught himself how to be a graphic designer, and then hired on a design team. And we strategically decided together to really build branding into our business model. So it's been amazing. And I do think we do very different things. He kind of works on the back end. I'm more on the front end. I'm very client facing on calls, and in person with clients every day, leading my team. And he is really making sure that we're set up to succeed from an operational POV. And then he does also serve as our creative director. So thinks a lot about the way that we show up as a brand, the newsletters that we send out, our Instagram, our decks. And then with our design team helps lead our design work and our design projects. So it's been a beautiful marriage. One of the most frequent questions I ever, get asked is what's it like, that work-life balance piece?
Mm.
And I do think for whatever reason, we both just really love it and we're well suited to spend so much time together. I also think it's a blessing. I have many girlfriends who have big kind of high-powered jobs and their partners also do, and they just don't actually spend any time together. They're all traveling, doing different things, and you're so exhausted and you catch up with your partner and it's laborious to explain all the things that you've just gone through in a day or a work week. I always use this example, but I can't imagine like coming home after a long day on the desk and say that Andrew is a totally different person and he's a lawyer and he's a partner at a law firm and has his own big job. And I see him at 9 p.m. and he has to explain his day and I go through my day. And like Frank from accounting fucked up the spreadsheet again. And like, reminder, Frank is annoying because of XYZ reason. Like you have to do the whole thing. And so we experience our days together, and it actually kind of builds in a boundary where the day's done and it's happened and we both know what went down and then we can kind of move on. So it's interesting. I actually think in some ways we have more boundaries than other couples who don't work together.
I think it's amazing to have this support because your business evolves so quickly in the most beautiful way. You can celebrate your wins with someone and not have to justify why you're staying late at the office or why you're going to this gala dinner. There's like a mutual understanding between
we
you
speak
guys,
the same language.
Would like to know, did you have a mentor or someone that really pushed you to pursue your vision with Alma or maybe earlier in your career?
I never did. And it's one of the reasons that mentorship is really important to me now. I invest a lot of time and energy in my team, the whole team, but especially my like individual team, the PR arm of the business. So I have a senior publicist, a publicist, and a coordinator working with me, and they're my little family. Like they get me up in the morning. They're incredibly smart, talented girls who I see a lot of myself in, each of them in different ways, and many other skills and strengths that I don't have. And so it's amazing to really sit together and chat and just sift through one another's brains every day. It's my favorite part of my job, really, is just being with them and being with my little crew. But no, I didn't have a mentor. I had two different people who I wouldn't put in the mentor category, but did teach me a lot. One was Elizabeth Biondi, who is the first ever female photo director of a US magazine. She's a photo director at the New Yorker. Really kick-ass, hard-ass German woman. Unbelievably high standards and expectations. And I've always had a really kind of like crazy work ethic. Like I just have an ability to work actually 24 hours a day if I need to. It's weird. Again, the obsessive personality, like addiction sort of part of me. But I think she kind of captured that like obsessive work product that she saw in me and was able to distill it into something sustainable. I don't know if that makes sense, but when I met her, I was very young working on the magazine. And I think she has an endurance and an ethic that is professional rather than, what are the right words? I don't know how to explain it. I just feel like when I met her, I was such a hard worker, but I was kind of all over the place. Anyway, she's fucking amazing. And then Nadine Johnson she was the founder of the first PR agency that I worked with, Nadine Johnson and Company. And she was also like a very rigorous, wild, carefree spirit, like party girl turned publicist, but just like scrappy, really hard worker, totally used her network. A fun fact is that Samantha Jones from Sex and the City is based off of Nadine. So
Okay.
yeah, and she was married to a man named Richard Wright, who owned the New York Post, this kind of big media mogul. And so that was actually also interesting seeing the way that the two of them sort of worked together. She would sort of make placements through him and had a really global understanding of media through her partner. But anybody who knows Nadine, she was just this like totally kooky character, really almost out of a movie. And so it makes sense that she inspired Samantha in the TV show. But both of them, they both taught me a lot, I think, about work ethic and network and relationship building.
Do you ever lose track on your creative projects? Maybe you're a professional artist or creative, but what used to be your passion now feels uninspiring. Or maybe you decided to pursue a safer career path, but you just know you have that artistic side of you that's dying to come out. At Feel Seen Space, our mission is to get you back in touch with your creativity, your flow, and your purpose. If you're ready to feel seen, we offer one-on-one holistic mentoring sessions designed to reconnect you to your inner artist. You'll find all the information at the link in the show notes. We hope to see you soon.
I kind of wanted to dive a little more into a PR's role, because you mentioned that your training was sort of happening in different layers, with first your eye and your love for the art itself, and then your notion of building relationships, and then this business side of things. That was like the final element for you to go and start your thing. But what do you think are the necessary qualities to do your job?
I think you have to be fast. I think you have to be an avid reader, but speed, responsiveness is unbelievably important. You've got to catch things before other people do. And you have to know what's going on in the world. You kind of have to have this like culture vulture sensibility, I would say. And it depends. Like if you're a fashion publicist, like you should know like the total ins and outs of your industry. If you're a food publicist, so it's not necessarily you need to know everything about every industry. For us, we really focus on arts and culture, but we do a lot of work in fashion, some hospitality. And so I'm really always keeping my ear to the ground around everything and just knowing what's going on, not just in New York City, my hometown, where many of our clients are, but really around I think you've got to keep up with trends. Because I grew up with writer and researcher parents, I think it's almost that anthropological, like research quality of just always reading, picking up information, knowing what's going on and wanting to learn more and having a sense of curiosity. Those are the skills that I think are completely innate to being a really successful communications professional. You've got to be a great writer. Depending on the level that you want to go in your career, I do think you have to be a great public speaker and presenter. Again, it's client services. Like you have to have the confidence and the execution skills to get on the call and really guide and inform your clients. So you take all of that back end research that you've done and you turn it into a strategy and a synthesized approach that then you have to share, and you have to really own it confidently. So there's many, many, many skills. And I think I've learned early on in building a team, there are a few skills in that bucket that are teachable, and there are some that are not teachable. And so I'm always looking out for, young talent who they have like that it factor, and I think a sense of hunger, like you have to be hungry. Yeah, I would say some of those things.
Do you feel like the same is true for the artists that you represent, or if the work is really good, then they can have a team around them to kind of build that for them?
Yeah, everyone's different. We've worked with some kind of shy artists in the past who have like a total like killer studio manager, and that's great. Yeah, I think artists are different. Artists are really different. I think to be a really great artist, you obviously have to have some sort of ego. You've chosen a career that amplifies your vision and your approach. And I think actually to be a successful communications professional, you have to have a little bit of an ego as well. Not an ego in the way that we think of having an ego, but actually just a super stellar belief in yourself. And so it's a really beautiful thing to have a confident artist who knows their vision and their approach work with someone who can take that and spit it back if they think, you know what, actually, this isn't the right. It's just having that sense of dynamism between the two parties, I think is really useful. But yeah, in terms of artists, we've worked with all sorts of people with different personalities and sensibilities, but everybody has really been true to their vision.
Interesting. And so to go back to this idea of staying on top of trends and how is everything evolving in the arts world, you started in 2020, but I feel like it seems like it was already 20 years ago, like so much has changed. And so I'm curious about your vision of the current landscape in arts and culture.
Yeah, it was a super interesting time to start a business. I think maybe Roxanne mentioned earlier, there was such a rapid rise in entrepreneurship actually in 2020. So many of my great friends decided, you know what, fuck this. I don't want to work for anyone else. This is my time. I'm going to do my own thing. And as a result of that, I think there was a massive amount of turnover in our industry. Many operations closed. It was a good time for a mix of people to sort of retire or pass the baton. And then many new operations and kind of young shops started opening. So for the first maybe 3 years of the business, 2020 to 23, I'd say, we launched an unbelievable amount of new concepts, new galleries, new companies. There was just this real rise in just new voices, which I think was incredibly exciting to be a part of. Again, I have to fact check myself on this, but I think in those 3 years, we probably launched like at least 20, 25 new galleries. And what's interesting there too is what lasts, what is launched out of that excitement and then stays kind of sustained versus things that maybe, I hate to say some people did like jump on a trend or a bandwagon and then realized it actually wasn't sustainable. But we have launched a few things that have since shuttered in a very short amount of time. And then we've also launched some things that have totally grown astronomically the way that we have in the last couple of years, but with super, a sense of intention. So yeah, the whole industry has kind of uprooted itself from that time. And I'm really excited by change. I'm not afraid of change. I've always loved change. So it's been really cool to feel like a change maker supporting other change makers in the industry. I think it's a total blessing.
And then also, I'm curious about where do you see the budgets come from these days? Because here in Europe, we have such a history of public money being invested into culture. And lately, it's been less so the case in France. And so you see all of these big institutions who are now looking into private money to function, And I'm wondering if that's something that you feel also in your market in the US, or is it just same as usual?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the biggest budget change that I've noticed is on the gallery side. Again, like that, the first kind of few years, 2020 to 2022, 23, there was a gigantic gallery boom, hence launching many new galleries. The art market totally exploded. A lot of people were spending more time at home and reconsidering the art on their walls. People were just like wiring galleries cash, buying things off of PDFs. Like it was a total craze. And then things, it was an unsustainable craze. And then things quieted down. Yeah, it's interesting. There was one year in particular, it might have been 2022, that we probably worked with 10, 12 galleries. Now we work with 3. And I think the commercial gallery landscape can be quite fickle and volatile. You're like a shopkeeper. So things are up, things are down. If people aren't buying, then you can't invest your resources in external support. So we've really seen an interesting sort of commercial gallery roller coaster in the last few years. I think our most sustainable client businesses are actually kind of in the nonprofit sector, nonprofit, but like privately funded galleries or museums, institutions, folks who've gotten some really great grants. Yeah, private funding and non-for-profit, I think is more kind of tangibly and sustainably funded.
Okay. So when you work with institution, you mentioned that you work with artists such as Tyler Mitchell, who's had like an incredible already, he's so young still, but incredible career. And so what do you think it takes for such a young artist to be trusted with such big clients and institutions and museums so early on in their career?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to have a lot of those same skills that I mentioned actually in a publicist, like, and a real sense of self-awareness, self-worth, ability to sit at the table and show up. And, you don't want people, the first thing that they think to be, oh, they're really young. Like, you want to be in a meeting with Tyler Mitchell and be like, this guy knows what the fuck he's talking about. Like, this guy's running a serious business,
Yeah.
and he's got a vision and he's unbelievably gifted. And that's always who Tyler's been. I've known him for a long time now. I've seen him totally blossom. He's never changed. He's always been super steadfast. He's always believed in himself. And Antoine's the same. And really every artist we work with, it's just that sense of belief. And yeah, I think I've operated similarly. Many of the girls on my team, I would actually say everybody on my team is really the same way. It's that total trust in yourself that then people take notice of. Yeah, Tyler's a wonderful example. I think what's cool about where he's at now is he's really challenging himself. There's a lot that he's interested in. We just spent some time together in Los Angeles and we were both like, I'm building a house right now, so I'm totally like on my furniture design, like architecture obsession zone. And I think he's kind of right there with me. And we've been talking a lot about the shaker movement and shaker furniture. And yeah, we had like so many conversations about furniture, and he's been making these, he calls them altars, these sort of furniture objects that then he houses his images inside. So, and he studied film at NYU. I think he's getting back into his film practice, but I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I do think that he's always evolving and really challenging himself. He's not a one-trick pony. And at the same time, you can really tell a Tyler Mitchell image when you see it. He's got a super distinct sense of tone and approach and interest, but he's really always pushing himself. And that's the kind of artist that I'm always super inspired to work with.
It's funny because I remember Roxanne meeting him like a long time ago when Roxanne was an agent, and saying as well, like, this guy is gonna,
Yeah,
is really gonna
you can
kill
tell
it.
a star when you meet. Yeah, you
Yeah.
always know right away.
Yeah. You mentioned like be really quick, be on trends, always know what's coming. Do you intentionally carve time out to be on the lookout for new trends and new artists, or is that something that's really included in your everyday life?
It's really my everyday life. I read a lot. And I see a lot. I see a ton of art. Even if I kind of know I'm not going to like a show, I go see it. Like, I have my own sense of tastes and sensibilities, but I really try to see everything. I mean, not everything in the world, but at least in New York City, any new major exhibition, I see it. Almost every weekend, I'll go to galleries. And so that's a huge part of my own sort of continued education. It's a wonderful way to meet people, bump into people, and just inform the work that you're doing. And then, not just art, but I see a ton of dance. I've been making a goal to see more kind of music and theater. I think just experiencing the world creatively is a hugely important part of my life and what I love to do, but also, what I do for a living. And then reading also, like, I'm probably subscribed to like 400 newsletters. I actually need to do a newsletter cleanse, but it is helpful. I'm always reading through a ton of stuff and getting ideas, who I want to pitch, something great going on that reminds me of something else that we're working through. And so I think using your brain and reading, and then using your eyes and seeing, like, those are just the two most important things.
So it sounds like you privilege like IRL experiences and like long form reading rather than maybe short form social media. Do you feel like that's really developed in the art world, or does it not trend so
Yeah.
well?
I'm definitely on Instagram. I'm definitely, that's a big part of the way the media landscape has shifted too. Like, now we make all sorts of placements on Instagram and think about this year specifically, we're working on a number of really exciting fashion exhibitions. And so that's a cool way for us to kind of, again, like back to the New Black Vanguard, sort of merge the two industries. And yeah, just think about like some really interesting substackers and creators who we can work with on social media videos and what that can result in. We're working with the Brooklyn Museum on an exhibition by Iris Van Herpen, who I'm totally inspired by. It's their first, the Brooklyn Museum has become, similar to the Met, quite known for their fashion exhibitions, Mugler, Dior, but this is their first time working with a contemporary living designer, not sort of looking back at a storied house. So it's really a total and radical shift from this historical sort of backwards approach, not backwards, but, like looking back in history approach to, really identifying a designer who's, just like carving out the future of the industry. And, Iris is very interested in science and technology and interesting new kind of recycled materials. So we're thinking, my team and I, about, working with a lot of great kind of fashion influencers who are going to be very new to us and we can bring into our orbit. Similar ICP, the photography museum here in New York that we've been working with for 2 years now, they're opening a Saint Laurent and photography show in the summer, which we're so excited about. ICP is really considering how to engage with their local community on the Lower East Side. We've been talking about the idea of putting together like a block party, maybe engaging with like some of the top vintage dealers in New York who specialize in Saint Laurent and having like a trunk show in the streets outside of ICP. So just like, that's also one of my favorite parts of my jobs. It's not necessarily placing stories, but it's that strategic guidance where if a client gives me a directive of, okay, these are the top 3 things that we're really focused on this year, how can those translate into press pieces that really tell the story, but also on-site acts or interesting collaborations or partnerships or great new ideas? Yeah, so I actually don't remember what your question was, but I think I went on a tangent.
No, but it's interesting, this fashion piece, because coming from the fashion world, it feels like
Yeah.
it's really separated from capital A arts, and now it's really like being
Blended.
Yeah. So I think
It's really cool. I love fashion. I think it's a really, really intense industry, but I do love fashion, and we've been working on a lot of these projects that sort of bridge the gap between the two industries. It's been super exciting.
And then how do you think, I mean, it's a very hard question, but how do you think in the future people will look back to our current time and culture and the arts and say like, that's what was new and that's what was coming alive at this time?
Oh, wow. It's a good question. So tough to say. So tough to say. We're in this interesting, we're like a few years out of the pandemic now, where this era of new business that I spoke about, some have stayed and some have not. So I think we're kind of entering a new chapter. Like in my mind, we've closed the door on a few really tumultuous and trying times in the industry, and we're embarking on a whole kind of new generation and wave. But it's really tough to say. Like right now, we're going through a totally unprecedented presidential moment that has also like deeply, we don't work with like the Smithsonian or any of those like super government backed institutions, but those guys are totally going through the ringer. We've had some clients who have lost grants that kind of center DEI. And so that's very discouraging to see. And I'm not sure what the long-term effects of this next 4 years are going to be on the arts and culture landscape. To make dramatic shifts in their exhibition programs, a lot of our museum clients, I think, are, probably reconsidering what they put on their walls in hopes of not going through like a global like PR war with the administration. Do we or don't we, put this show on view? And so I do think that our times and our politics are deeply enmeshed with what happens in arts and culture. And so that, it's a bit of a question mark for me. I don't know in 10, 20, 50 years where we're going to be. I think technology and AI obviously are developing totally like at a rapid pace. Talk about a business developing fast. Like what's happening now in AI is going to be really like a game changing thing for every industry. And the media landscape has changed a lot. Like people consume things differently now. You mentioned social media, like people don't really read anymore, actually, like people watch videos. And so the strongest engagement that we see for a lot of our placements is that, say, like a story on Hypebeast comes out. People see it because it ends up in like a Hypebeast roundup on the social. People aren't going to hypebeast.com, going to the art section and reading a review. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe they are, but not really, to be completely frank. And so I actually think AI, technology, social media, as it relates to like the world of publicity and media, those are the things that are really, really changing quickly. And I think we need to evolve with the times. You know, you have to evolve or die, really. It's one of the reasons that we've kind of insulated the business by building out all of these different divisions to cater to different needs for our clients. It's tough to really rely on just making placements over and over and over again. Like when I started out, obviously, you know, enjoy what I do greatly and I love our clients and we've got some great stories to tell and I do a good job, but I will say like it was pretty easy to place stories. And it's not that I wasn't trying because I'm always, you know, taking a really fine tooth comb to everything that I do, but I feel like I would, you know, build out a press grid and pitch 30 people and all 30 would cover. Like people were like, yep, yeah, we'll do it. That's good. That's what you want. But now budgets are tighter. People have just much, much smaller teams. Every single magazine or paper I've worked with, their editorial staff has shrunk at least by 30%, some even more, 80%. Most of these magazines are working with like skeleton staff. So just from a capacity standpoint, things have really changed. So those are like some of the evolving things that I've noticed in the last couple of years that we have to really keep an eye on and think about what's the best way for us to service our clients while knowing that things are evolving in real time.
Well, so interesting. Thank you so much.
That's it for today's episode. We thank our guests for their trust, and we thank you for being a part of our community. If you like this episode and want to support our work, consider ranking our podcast on Apple or Spotify. And if you know someone who could benefit from this conversation, please share our work with them to help them spread the dream of a conscious, creative community. Talk soon.